The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 2, Part 2, Roast Mutton. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument, they all agreed to it. "No good roasting 'em now, it'd take all night," said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. "Don't start the argument all over again, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert that had spoken. "You are," said Bert. "You're a liar," said William, and so the argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them fine and boil them. So they got a black pot and they took out their knives. "No good boiling him. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut up," said they, "or we'll never have done. And you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you, I'd like to know?" "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them and boil them the next time. "Who shall we sit on first?" said the voice. "Better sit on the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eyes had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom. "But if he wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense, the one with the grey stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "Then what'd you say it was grey for?" said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it." "That I never did," said Tom. "It was you." 2 to 1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said Tom and Bert together. "The night's getting on, and dawn comes early. Let's get on with it." "Dawn take you all and be stoned to you," said a voice that sounded like William's, but it wasn't, for just at that moment the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him, and there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them, for trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains they are made of, and never move again. That is what happened to Bert, and Tom, and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb down out of a thorn bush. Then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that had kept the trolls bickering and quarrelling until the light came and made an end to them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there and listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what had happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. "A silly time to go practicing pinching and pickpocketing," said Bombur, "when what we wanted was fire and food." "And that's just what you wouldn't have got out of those fellows without a struggle, in any case," said Gandalf. "Anyway, you're wasting your time now. Don't you realize that the trolls must have had a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it." They searched about, and soon found the marks of a troll's stony boots going away through the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a door of stone leading to a cave, but they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. "Would this be any good?" asked Bilbo when they were getting tired and angry. "I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight." He held out a largest key, though, no doubt, William had thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. "Well, why on earth didn't you mention it before?" they cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole. Then the store door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor, and a nasty smell was in the air, but there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder, all of all sorts, from brass buttons to pots full of gold coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes, too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls, I am afraid, and they belonged to victims, and among them were several swords of various makes, shapes, and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly, because of the beautiful scabbards and jewelled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for the hobbit. "These look like good blades," said the wizard, half drawing them out and looking at them curiously. "They were not made by any troll, nor by any smith among men in these parts and days, but when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them." "Let's get out of this horrible smell," said Fili. So they carried out the pots of coins, and such food as was untouched and looked fit to eat, also one barrel of ale, which was still full. And by that time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they had gotten from the troll's larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese, and plenty of ale, and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. And after that they slept, for the night had been disturbed, and they were nothing more until the afternoon. Then they brought up the ponies and carried away the pots of gold and buried them very secretly not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them, just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. When that was done, they all mounted once more and jogged along again on the path toward the east. "Where did you go to, if I may ask?" said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. "To look ahead," said he. "And what brought you back in the nick of time?" "Looking behind," said he. "Exactly," said Thorin, "but could you be more plain?" "I went on to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell." "Where's that?" asked Bilbo. "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You'll get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of trolls. It was they who told me that there were 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they waylaid strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere." "Thank you," said Thorin. Thus concludes Chapter 2 of The Hobbit. Chapter 3 of The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 3 A Short Rest. Part 1. They did not sing or tell stories that day, even though the weather improved, nor the next day, nor the day after. They had begun to feel that danger was not far away on either side. They camped under the stars, and their horses had more to eat than they had, for there was plenty of grass, but there was not much in their bags, even what they got from the trolls. One morning they forded a river at a wide, shallow place, full of the noise of stones and foam. The far bank was steep and slippery. When they got to the top of it, leading the ponies, they saw that the great mountains had marched down very near to them. Already they seemed only a day's easy journey from the feet of the nearest. Dark and drear it looked, although there were patches of sunlight on its brown sides, and behind its shoulders the tips of snow peaks gleamed. "Is that the mountain?" asked Bilbo in a solemn voice, looking at it with round eyes. He had never seen a thing that looked that big before. "Of course not," said Balin. "It's only the beginning of the Misty Mountains, and we have to get through or over or under those somehow before we can come into the Wilderland beyond. And is it deal of a way, even from the other side of them to the lonely mountain in the east, where Smaug lives on our treasure. Oh, said Bilbo, and just at that moment he felt more tired than he had ever remembered feeling before. He was thinking once again of his comfortable chair before the fire, in his favourite sitting room, in his hobbit hall, and of the kettle singing. Not for the last time. Now, Gandalf led the way. We must not miss the road, or we shall be done for, he said. We need food, for one thing, and rest in reasonable safety. Also, it is very necessary to tackle the Misty Mountains by the proper path, or else we get lost in them and have to come back and start the beginning again, if you ever get back at all. They asked him where he was making for, and he answered, You are come to the very edge of the wild, as some of you may know. Hidden somewhere ahead of us is the fair valley of Rivendell, where Elrond lives in the last homely house. I sent a message by my friends, and we are expected. That sounded nice and comforting, but they had not got there yet, and it was not so easy as it sounds to find the last homely house west of the mountains. There seemed to be no trees and no valleys and no hills to break the ground in front of them, only one vast slope going slowly up and up to meet the feet of the nearest mountain, a wide land the colour of heather and crumbling rock, with patches and slashes of grass green and moss green showing where the water might be. Morning passed, afternoon came, but in all the silent waste there was no sign of any dwelling. They were growing anxious, for they now saw that the house might be hidden almost anywhere between them and the mountains. They came out unexpected valleys, narrow with deep sides that opened suddenly at their feet, and they looked down, surprised to see trees below them and running water at the bottom. There were gullies that they could almost leap over, but very deep with waterfalls in them. There were dark ravines that one could neither jump nor climb. There were bogs, some of them green, pleasant places to look at with flowers, growing bright and tall, but a pony that walked there on a pack on its back would never come out again. It was indeed a much wider land from the ford to the mountains than ever you would have guessed. Bilbo was astonished. The only path was marked with white stones, some of which were small, and others were half covered with moss or heather. Although it was a very slow business of following the track, even guided by Gandalf, who seemed to know his way about pretty well. His head and beard wagged this way and that as he looked for the stones, and they followed his head, but they seemed no nearer to the end of the search when the day began to fail. Tea time had long gone by, and it seemed supper time would soon do the same. There were moths fluttering about, and the light became very dim, for the moon had not risen. Bilbo's pony began to stumble over roots and stones. They came to the edge of a steep fall on the ground so suddenly that Gandalf's horse nearly slipped down the slope. Here it is at last, he called, and the others gathered round him and looked over the edge. They saw the valley far below. They could hear the voice of hurrying water in a rocky bed at the bottom. The scent of trees was in the air, and there was a light on the valley side across the water. Bilbo never forgot the way they slithered and slipped in the dusk down this steep zigzag path into the secret valley of Rivendell. The air grew warmer as they got lower, and the smell of pine trees made him drowsy, so that every now and again he nodded and nearly fell or bumped his nose on the pony's neck. The spirits rose as they went down and down. The trees changed to beech and oak, and there was a comfortable feeling in the twilight. The last green had almost faded out of the grass when they came at length to an open glade not far from the banks of the stream. It smells like elves, thought Bilbo, and he looked up to the stars. They were burning bright and blue, and just then there came a burst-like song, like laughter from the trees. Thus ends the next stage of The Hobbit, Part 1 of Chapter 3. I hope that you enjoyed it, and I do hope that you like and subscribe if you do. Sleep well and enjoy the starlight.